Tearful Omega arrived at mate ceremony. The cold Alpha King wiped tears and marked Omega first. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. The grand hall of the castle was adorned with golden banners and delicate flowers, a scene that was meant to be filled with joy. But for Lily, the Omega standing at the entrance, the atmosphere felt suffocating. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her legs wobbled under the weight of the event she was about to endure. This was no ordinary ceremony. It was the mate ceremony, the most important event in an Omega's life. As the door swung open, she stepped forward, her steps hesitant, her hands trembling. The eyes of the entire court were on her, but all she could focus on was the man waiting at the altar. King. His name alone carried power. The Alpha King, cold and imposing, stood tall with his piercing gaze fixed ahead. His reputation preceded him, distant, untouchable, and feared by many. The whispers around her spoke of his indifference, how he had never shown warmth, even in the presence of his own people. But Lily, as vulnerable as she was, couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this moment. The closer she got to him, the more her emotions swirled. She had never been the center of attention, especially not in a room filled with alphas. It made her feel small, invisible, and for a moment, she wished she could disappear. But there was no turning back. This was the day her fate would be sealed. As she approached the king, her breath caught in her throat, and before she could control herself, a tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but the emotion lingered in her eyes. King noticed the tear. His cold demeanor didn't waver, but something flickered in his gaze. He took a step toward her, his large, imposing figure casting a shadow over her delicate form. The room fell silent, and all eyes were on them. Then, in an unexpected gesture, King reached out, gently brushing the tear from her cheek. The movement was so soft, so unexpected, it left Lily speechless. She couldn't believe it. The Alpha King, the very person she had feared, was showing her a kindness she never thought she would receive. His touch, though brief, was enough to send a wave of warmth through her, calming the storm of emotions inside her. But it wasn't just the touch that surprised her. It was the look in his eyes, a look that softened, just for a moment, as if he understood her pain. For the first time in her life, Lily felt seen, not as an Omega, but as a person. Then, with a firm yet gentle hand, King marked her, completing the mate ceremony. The room erupted in applause, but all Lily could hear was the steady beat of her heart, now calm, now certain. She was no longer just the vulnerable Omega. She was his. And perhaps, just perhaps, King wasn't as cold as everyone believed. Irritation and excitement ran through Lily as she stood beside King in the grand hall, the echo of the ceremony still lingering in the air. The applause from the crowd had faded, but the weight of the moment had not left her. She could feel the warmth of his presence beside her, though King said nothing. His silence, which had once filled her with dread, now seemed different. He wasn't pushing her away, nor was he indifferent. Instead, there was a quiet understanding in his eyes that she couldn't quite grasp. Lily tried to steady her breath, but her heart kept racing. She had always imagined this moment, her mate ceremony, as a time of celebration, but it had turned into something far more complicated. She was marked, tied to this cold, untouchable alpha in a way she couldn't yet understand. They walked together, moving toward the grand staircase that led to the private chambers above. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Lily couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything between them. When they reached the door to the private quarters, King stopped. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You are mine now," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Yet there was a hint of something else, something softer, almost vulnerable. Lily couldn't find the words to respond. How could she, when she was still processing everything? The way he had wiped away her tears, the way he had marked her. It was all too much to take in. But there was one thing she knew for sure. The king wasn't as cold as he seemed. He wasn't the unfeeling alpha that everyone said he was. There was something more to him, something buried beneath the surface, something that made Lily's heart ache with a strange longing. King stepped closer to her, his towering figure casting a shadow over her. His eyes softened, and for the first time, Lily saw a flicker of something that looked like regret, or maybe it was fear. "I know you have questions," he said, his voice low. "And I know this is overwhelming. But I will answer them when you're ready." Lily nodded, unsure of what to say. She had so many questions, but she didn't know where to begin. Instead, she simply took a deep breath and said, "Thank you." It was a small thing, but it felt like the most honest thing she could offer in that moment. King studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. Then, without a word, he opened the door to the private chamber and gestured for her to enter. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. It was luxurious, with rich velvet drapes and golden fixtures that glowed in the dim light. The bed was large, the covers soft, but it was the space between them that felt strange. Lily could feel the weight of his gaze on her back as she stood by the window, unsure of what to do next. She had always been told that this moment would be filled with passion, with the promise of a life together. But instead, there was silence. The quiet stretched between them like an invisible thread. "You're not what I expected," Lily finally said, breaking the silence. King tilted his head slightly, as if intrigued. "And what did you expect?" he asked, his voice still soft, but with an edge of amusement. Lily hesitated, not sure if she should answer. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I guess I thought you would be different. Colder, maybe. More distant." King chuckled softly, the sound surprising her. "You're not the first to think that," he replied. "But people see what they want to see." He paused, studying her with a look that seemed to weigh every word. "And what do you see now?" Lily's heart fluttered in her chest. She hadn't expected such a direct question. She had always known King to be distant, but now, she wasn't so sure. She saw something in him that she hadn't before. "I see someone who is trying," she said quietly. King looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The air grew heavier, and Lily could feel her pulse quicken. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he said softly, "but I will try." The words hit her harder than she expected, stirring something deep inside her. She wasn't sure if she could trust him yet, but there was a part of her that wanted to believe him. There was a part of her that wanted to see if the king could truly change. And so, for the first time, Lily allowed herself to hope. Hope that this cold, distant alpha would become something more for both of them. The next few days passed in a blur for Lily. She had expected the days following her mate ceremony to be filled with joy and excitement, but instead, they were filled with uncertainty. King had been distant, though not cold. He never spoke much, and when he did, it was always in short, measured sentences. It was as if he was giving her space, or perhaps, trying to figure out what this new chapter meant for him. Lily found herself waking up early, staring out of the large windows that overlooked the castle grounds. The world outside seemed peaceful, but inside, everything felt unsettled. She had never lived in a place like this before, so grand, so full of expectations. And then there was King, the man she was now bound to. She still didn't fully understand him. He wasn't the man she thought he was, but she wasn't sure who he really was, either. She spent most of her time in the palace, wandering the corridors, trying to adjust to her new life. On the third day after the ceremony, Lily was in the garden, picking flowers when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, expecting one of the servants, but instead, she saw King. He stood a few feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're still here," he said, his tone neutral. "I thought you might want to go home, back to your family." His words were simple, but they struck a chord with her. Home. The word brought back memories of her old life, of the small cottage she had grown up in, of the warmth of her family. It seemed so far away now, like a different lifetime. But what did she have now? A palace? A king? Was this her life now? Lily tried to push the feeling of loneliness away, but it lingered, like a shadow she couldn't shake. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm just getting used to everything." King looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense. "I don't want you to feel trapped here," he said softly, his voice softer than it had been before. "But this is your life now. You're my mate, and I will protect you, but you need to decide what kind of life you want to have." Lily didn't know what to say. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he would be there for her. But she didn't know what that would look like. Would he be the cold, distant king she had seen at the ceremony? Or was there something more to him that he was hiding? She could see the conflict in his eyes, the same way she felt it in her heart. King was trying, she knew that. But she wasn't sure if that was enough. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Everything feels so new, so different. King took a step closer to her, his presence overwhelming. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers. For a moment, there was silence, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady. One step at a time. Lily nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed him. She had always been told that love and loyalty came naturally with a mate ceremony, but it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel natural at all. Still, as she stood there with King, feeling the warmth of his hand against hers, she couldn't deny that something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was hope. Hope that, with time, they would find a way to make this work. They walked back to the palace together in silence, neither of them speaking, but something between them had changed. The tension was still there, but it had softened, just slightly. Perhaps, in the end, that was all they could do, take it one step at a time. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Lily began to find her place within the walls of the castle. The initial feeling of being an outsider had begun to fade, replaced by the quiet rhythm of daily life. She spent her mornings in the garden, tending to the flowers, finding peace in their colors and scents. The afternoons were spent reading or walking through the palace corridors, always trying to avoid the overbearing presence of the servants and the ever-watchful eyes of the court. She had grown used to the silence that filled the air around her, but it was the silence between her and King that still unsettled her. King, despite his quiet nature, had started to show subtle signs of change. Though he was still distant, there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when his gaze softened as he watched her, or when his tone, usually so firm, would carry a hint of warmth. It was as though he was trying to reach out to her, but wasn't sure how. Lily, in turn, found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. She had always feared him, his cold exterior, his commanding presence. But now, she found herself hoping for more. More of the warmth he had shown her in the garden, more of the vulnerability that flickered in his eyes whenever he looked at her. The walls he had built around himself seemed to be cracking, bit by bit, and Lily wasn't sure if that scared her or made her want to help him more. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the palace, King appeared in the garden. Lily was kneeling by the rose bushes, her fingers carefully trimming the dead stems. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt his presence the moment he stepped into view. He stood a few feet away, watching her with a calm expression. "You spend a lot of time out here," he remarked quietly, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of curiosity. Lily looked up, meeting his gaze. She smiled softly, feeling a flutter in her chest. "It's peaceful," she replied, her voice gentle. "I find it helps me think." King nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "And what are you thinking about?" Lily hesitated, her thoughts swirling. It was a simple question, but for some reason, it made her heart race. What was she thinking about? So many things. Her life here, the future, and the strange, confusing bond she now shared with him. "I'm thinking about everything," she said, the words coming out more easily than she expected. "About us, about what this all means. It's hard to make sense of it sometimes." King's expression softened, though he still stood at a distance. "I know," he said, his voice quieter now. "I never imagined things would be like this. I thought it would be easier." Lily stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands. "You don't have to pretend everything is fine," she said, her voice firm but kind. "I'm not expecting you to be someone you're not." There was a brief pause, and then King stepped forward, closing the distance between them. For the first time, he reached out, his hand hovering near hers, as if unsure. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, they stood there in silence, both searching for something they weren't sure how to find. "I don't know how to be what you need," he admitted quietly, "but I want to try. I don't want to disappoint you." Lily felt a wave of emotion rush through her. She had never seen him like this. Not vulnerable, not uncertain. He was usually so strong, so sure of himself, but now, he was showing her a side of himself she hadn't expected. And in that moment, she realized something. He wasn't just the cold, distant Alpha King. He was a man who had been shaped by the weight of his title, the responsibilities of his crown. He had never been allowed to be anything else. And now, here he was, trying to be something more. She placed her hand in his, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "We'll figure this out together," she said softly, her voice full of determination. King looked at her, his gaze softening further. For the first time since their mate ceremony, Lily saw a hint of hope in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They were both trying, each, in their own way, to make sense of the life they had been thrust into. But as they stood there, hand in hand, Lily felt a spark of something she hadn't expected, hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way through this together. Ivy vines crept along the palace walls as the days continued to slip by, each one blending into the next. For Lily, time seemed to move both too quickly and too slowly. Her bond with King was growing, but it was a slow, delicate process, like a fragile flower pushing its way through rocky soil. They had moments of closeness, moments when their conversations felt easy, when laughter could be heard echoing through the halls. But there were still barriers between them, walls that neither of them knew how to bring down. Lily spent her mornings in the garden, her hands lost in the soil, her mind adrift in thoughts about what came next. She was still adjusting to life in the palace, to the life she had never asked for but had found herself a part of. She had been an Omega, always told she was weaker, always told she would never be the one to lead or to take charge. And now, she was marked, bound to a king who had his own struggles, his own battles to fight. It was a strange place to be, somewhere between duty and choice, between what she had always known and what was now expected of her. One afternoon, as Lily sat in the garden, she felt the familiar weight of someone's presence behind her. She turned and saw King standing near the entrance, watching her with that same unreadable expression. He had become a fixture in her life, just as she had become a part of his. "I thought you would be here," he said, his voice low, carrying the same calm that always seemed to follow him. "I've been thinking about the future," Lily replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "About what happens next. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." King took a step closer, his expression softening. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said quietly. "None of us do. We learn as we go." There was something in his words that struck her, something honest, something raw. He wasn't pretending to know everything. He didn't have all the answers, either. They were in this together, figuring it out, step by step. "I don't know if I can be what you need," Lily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I want to try. I want to help you, even if I don't fully understand this bond between us." King stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. There was a warmth in them now, something she hadn't seen before. "You already are what I need," he said softly. "You're more than I ever expected." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Lily's heart skip a beat. She had always believed that she was not enough, that she was too weak, too small, too insignificant. But in that moment, standing there in the garden with King, she realized how wrong she had been. She was enough. She had always been enough. And King, with all his power and strength, was beginning to see that, too. The days that followed felt like a quiet turning point. The walls between them weren't gone, but they had started to crack. There was an unspoken understanding now, a mutual respect that hadn't been there before. King began to include her more in his decisions, asking for her input, valuing her thoughts. It was small, but it was a start. They spent more time together, quiet dinners in the grand dining hall, walks through the gardens, conversations about everything and nothing. For the first time since their mate ceremony, Lily felt like she was a part of his world, not just a bystander. She could see the changes in him, too. The king who had once been so distant, so cold, was beginning to open up, even if just a little. The walls he had built around himself were slowly coming down, piece by piece. But there were still moments of hesitation, moments when old habits resurfaced, when the weight of his responsibilities as a king made him retreat into himself again. Lily understood. She didn't expect him to change overnight, but she could see the effort he was putting in, the small steps he was taking toward a future they could build together. And that, in itself, was enough to give her hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the castle, Lily and King stood together on the balcony. The world below them, was peaceful, the quiet hum of the night filling the air. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Lily asked, her voice soft, almost wistful. King stood beside her, his gaze focused on the horizon. "I do," he said quietly, "and I know we still have a long way to go. But I'm not doing this alone. We're in this together." Lily smiled, her heart light. It wasn't perfect, not yet. But for the first time, she truly believed they could find their way through it, together. The weeks passed, and Lily found herself settling into a new rhythm within the palace. The initial shock of her new life was beginning to wear off, replaced by a quiet acceptance of the world around her. The palace, with all its grandeur and formality, had become her home, even if it still felt foreign in many ways. She had begun to spend more time with King, their moments together no longer feeling forced or uncomfortable. Slowly, their bond grew stronger, though unspoken words lingered between them. There were still days when the weight of their roles in life pressed down on both of them, but for the most part, Lily felt like they were learning to navigate this new path together. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, King found her once again in the garden. She was kneeling beside a row of lavender, her hands gently caressing the delicate petals as if trying to pull some peace from the earth itself. She looked up as she heard his approach, offering him a small smile. "You always seem to find me out here," she remarked, her voice soft. King's lips quirked into a faint smile as he stood a few feet away, his gaze steady on her. "It's where you feel at peace," he said, his voice deep, but not without a trace of warmth. There was a moment of silence, and Lily wondered if he was waiting for her to say something more. He had been more open with her in recent days, and though it was small, it was progress. "I think I needed this," Lily said after a pause. "I needed to know that life could still have moments of peace, even in the middle of all this chaos." King's eyes softened as he stepped closer. "You don't have to face it alone," he said quietly. "I know I'm not the easiest person to be around, but I am trying. I know I haven't always made it clear, but I want you to know I'm here for you." His words, so simple yet sincere, made something inside Lily stir. She had always thought of him as distant, as a king who carried the world on his shoulders with little room for personal connection. But the more they spent time together, the more she realized how wrong she had been. King wasn't cold, he was just burdened. And in that moment, she saw him for what he truly was, a man, struggling with his own fears and uncertainties, but still trying his best to be the leader his people needed. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and stepped closer to him. "I don't expect perfection from you," she said, her voice steady. "I just need you to be here, with me, through all of this." King's expression softened even more, and for the first time in a long while, Lily saw a true vulnerability in his eyes. "I can do that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it's taken me this long to figure it out. I thought I had to be strong all the time, that I had to keep everything inside. But you've shown me that I don't have to do it alone." The honesty in his words made Lily's heart ache, but in a way that felt comforting, not painful. For so long, she had felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her own shoulders. But now, standing there with King, she realized that they didn't have to carry it alone. They could share the burden, lean on each other when the world became too heavy. There was still much to figure out, many uncertainties ahead, but in that moment, Lily knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone. And neither was he. They stood together in the garden as the sun sank lower, casting the world in golden light. It was a peaceful moment, one that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. There were no promises made, no grand declarations, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They would face the future together, whatever it held, and that, in itself, was enough to give Lily hope. As they walked back toward the palace, side by side, the weight of their shared bond felt lighter, less overwhelming. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Lily felt ready to walk it with King. Together, as the days passed, the connection between Lily and King continued to grow, though it was still fragile in some ways. The palace, once an overwhelming and intimidating place for her, now felt like a home, albeit one filled with responsibilities and expectations. She spent her time in the gardens, the quiet spaces that had always brought her peace, and in the library, learning more about the world she now belonged to. King, though still reserved, had opened up in small ways, showing her that his strength came not just from his title, but from his vulnerability. They had yet to share their true feelings, but there was a shift between them, an unspoken understanding that made everything seem a little less daunting. One evening, as the sky began to fade from pink to deep purple, King found her again in the garden. She had always found solace in the flowers and the quiet, and tonight was no different. The air was cool, the scent of jasmine filling the night. Lily turned as she heard his footsteps approaching, a smile forming on her lips as she saw him standing there, his presence both comforting and imposing. "You always know where to find me," she said, her voice light, though there was a hint of amusement in her tone. King gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's because I've learned that you find peace here," he replied, his voice low, but warm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them, comfortable and familiar. Lily noticed how the tension that used to exist between them was slowly dissolving. It wasn't gone completely, but there was a sense of ease in his presence that hadn't been there before. She felt it too. He wasn't the same man who had stood so far away from her on that first day, cold and unreachable. He was opening up, little by little, and that meant something. "I've been thinking," Lily said, breaking the silence, "about our future, about what we can do together." King turned his gaze toward her, his expression thoughtful. "And what do you think we should do?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. She hesitated, unsure of how to articulate what she felt. She had never been one to think too far ahead, but there was something in the way King looked at her, something that made her believe that perhaps they could build something more than just a duty to one another. "I think we need to make our own path," Lily said finally, her voice steady. "We can't rely on what others expect from us. We need to decide who we are, not just as Alpha and Omega, but as people, as partners." King's eyes softened at her words, and for a moment, she saw something in his gaze, something akin to admiration. "I think you're right," he said quietly. "We've been so caught up in everything else, in the roles we were born into, that we forgot what it means to just be ourselves." There was a pause, and then King stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the best way. He reached out and gently took her hand in his. "I don't know what the future holds, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to face it with you. Together. I want us to build something strong, not just for our kingdom, but for ourselves." Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly believe in the possibility of their future. It wasn't perfect. They weren't perfect, but there was something real between them now, something that went beyond the formality of their bond. "We will," she said softly, looking up at him. "Together." The words hung in the air between them, full of promise. They didn't need grand gestures or declarations, just the quiet understanding that, despite everything, they were ready to take on the future side by side. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows over the garden, they stood together in that moment, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as partners, learning and growing together. It was enough to know that, in this life full of uncertainty, they had found something worth fighting for. As the days grew into weeks, the bond between Lily and King deepened, though both knew there was still much to learn about one another. They had come a long way from the cold, distant first meeting, and yet, their journey was far from over. There were still uncertainties, things left unsaid, and expectations hanging over them. But there was also a sense of peace that had settled between them. The once overwhelming palace now felt like a place where they could breathe, a place where, despite the weight of the crown and the responsibilities that came with it, they had carved out a space for themselves. It was a new kind of life, and one that neither of them had anticipated, but it was theirs, together. One afternoon, as the sunlight filtered softly through the large windows of the royal chambers, Lily sat by the window, looking out at the horizon. The view from the castle was breathtaking, the rolling hills stretching far into the distance, the green fields dotted with grazing animals. She had never known a life like this, one that seemed so different from the simple days she had once known. And yet, she had learned to love the stillness of the land, the quiet beauty of the world around her. King entered the room quietly, his footsteps soft on the marble floor. Lily didn't turn at first, but she felt his presence, just as she always did now. He didn't speak immediately, but when he did, his voice was calm, almost soothing. "You've been distant today," he said softly, approaching her. "Is everything all right?" Lily turned her head to look at him, offering him a small smile. "I've just been thinking," she replied, her voice gentle. "About everything. About us. And about the future." King nodded, as if he understood. He moved closer to her, standing beside the window, his gaze following hers out toward the land beyond. "It's natural to wonder," he said after a moment. "We've come a long way, and yet, there's still so much unknown. I won't pretend to have all the answers, but I can promise that we will figure this out together." Lily's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of certainty. The future wasn't clear, and the challenges they would face were still unknown, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone in it. King was right. They would face it together. "I know," Lily said softly, looking up at him. "I just never thought this would be my life. That I'd be here, with you. But now that I am, I don't know what to expect. I don't know what the future holds for us." King's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his presence warm and steady. "I don't have all the answers either," he said. "But what I do know is that we have something worth fighting for. We've both been through so much, and yet, here we are. We have a chance to build something together. A life, a future, and that's more than I ever thought I would have." His words hit her harder than she expected, and Lily felt a mixture of emotions stir within her. She had never imagined that her life would take this turn, that she would be standing here, talking about a future with a man she had once feared. But now, she realized that the future they could build wasn't one of fear, but one of hope, of partnership. They had both been through so much, and despite it all, they had found each other. "I never thought I could have this," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try. I want to build that future with you." King's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. There was a quiet understanding between them, a promise that neither of them had voiced, but both of them had come to believe in. King reached out, his hand brushing against hers in a simple, yet meaningful gesture. "We will," he said, his voice full of conviction. Together, the words settled between them, carrying a weight that neither of them could deny. They didn't need grand declarations or promises of perfection. What mattered was the quiet, unspoken bond they had begun to forge, step by step. And as they stood there, hand in hand, looking out at the horizon, Lily knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready for it. And with King by her side, she knew they would find their way through whatever challenges lay ahead. The days in the palace had grown more comfortable for Lily, though the weight of her new life never truly left her. The once intimidating halls of the royal home now felt familiar, and the uncertainty that had once clouded her future had begun to fade. She spent her days in a routine. The peace of the palace mingled with the quiet tension of knowing her life was now a constant balancing act. King, as ever, was a presence she could not ignore. Though he had softened, his position as Alpha King still hung over him like an unshakable mantle. They had grown closer, but there was still a distance, an unspoken boundary neither of them knew how to cross. Yet, she had come to understand him more with each passing day. She saw the weight he carried, the burdens he bore as a leader. It was a responsibility that kept him distant, but it was also a burden that made him human, made him someone she could begin to trust. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun spilled across the courtyard, Lily sat on the stone bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She watched as the sunlight shimmered across the palace grounds, the colors of the sky shifting with the onset of dusk. It had become her favorite time of day, when the world was still, and she had a moment to reflect on everything that had changed. "You're here," King's voice broke through her thoughts, and Lily turned to see him standing a few feet away. His usual composure was softened by the quiet of the evening, and for a moment, he looked less like a king and more like the man she had come to know in the private moments they shared. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, his tone gentle. Lily smiled faintly, her eyes lingering on him. "It's peaceful here," she said. "I can think, and the world feels a little quieter." King moved closer, his expression thoughtful. "I understand," he replied, standing beside her. "Sometimes, it's hard to find peace amidst everything else." Lily nodded, sensing the weight of his words. She had learned that while his title demanded authority, it also came with burdens no one could truly understand unless they stood in his shoes. "It's not just the palace, is it?" she asked softly. "It's everything. Your responsibilities. The expectations." King didn't speak immediately, but when he did, his voice was low and filled with a quiet sincerity. "I thought I could do it all. Alone," he admitted. "I thought I could keep everything in balance, that I could carry the weight of it without anyone else's help. But it's not that simple. The pressure doesn't go away. It doesn't lessen just because I wish it would." Lily turned to face him, her heart aching with empathy. She had seen the way he had tried to handle everything, the way he had pulled away at times, probably because he felt the need to be strong, to be the one who held everything together. "You don't have to do it alone," she said softly, her voice steady. "You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to carry all of it by yourself." King's gaze softened at her words, and for a brief moment, the hard edges of his expression softened. "I'm still learning," he said quietly. "Learning that it's okay to ask for help. Learning that I don't have to be the one to fix everything." There was a silence between them then, not uncomfortable, but filled with understanding. In that silence, Lily felt a deep sense of connection with him. It wasn't about grand gestures or promises. It was the quiet moments, the shared understanding that they both had their flaws, their doubts, but that they were willing to face them together. She reached out then, her hand brushing against his, a simple act that carried more weight than words ever could. "We'll figure it out," she said. "We'll learn together." King looked at her, his expression softening even further, and for the first time in a long while, she saw something close to peace in his eyes. "Together," he echoed, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, Lily realized that she wasn't just the Omega he had been bound to by fate. She was someone he trusted, someone he was beginning to rely on. They had both come so far, and there was still a long way to go. But whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face it together. And that thought, that promise, made everything seem a little less daunting. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, they stood there side by side, two people who had been brought together by circumstance, but who were now learning to carve out their own path. Together.